Hey everyone, this is Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story. Our focus continues to be on the crisis in Afghanistan, where drone strikes by the Americans continue. But what will that really change on the ground? Let's bring up our big story today. We're looking at the aftermath of the withdrawal by the Americans. And as we said, the drone strikes have continued. This time, the Americans say they've taken out a car laden with explosives that they say was headed to the Kabul airport. But the Americans are not ruling out another set of attacks at the Kabul airport or elsewhere in the city. Meanwhile, Afghans are saying that 10 people died, including children, in the latest drone strike. These images are virtually back to the future. This is how the war against terror started 20 years ago, except this time, instead of it being against the Taliban, the Americans are talking a language of cooperating with the Taliban. The Taliban is objecting to these drone strikes, but there's something that seems almost cosmetic about this entire exchange of rhetoric between the Taliban and the United States government. As D-Day approaches, the 31st is the deadline for the Americans to get all of their people out of Afghanistan. The question for us in South Asia is whether there's more to these attacks than meets the eye. Is the intent, for example, for the Taliban to gain accelerated legitimacy? And if the Taliban is going to be considered a legitimate partner today in the fight against terrorism, what does that mean for the geopolitics, not just of the region, but for the entire world? Let's bring up today on the program one of the world's foremost terrorism experts. Professor Christine Fair is at the Georgetown University. She spent a lifetime studying terrorism and many of these terror groups and has been calling out some of the hoaxes and rhetoric around this entire conversation. Welcome, Christine. It's great to have you back on the program. What do you make of this bizarre sort of inflection point that the world stands at today? 2 decades ago, the Americans invaded Afghanistan to fight against the Taliban. Today, the Taliban is being called, well, not quite a partner, but certainly a group that the United States is having to cooperate with in its fight against the ISIS. Does this ring true for you?
No, I mean, it really doesn't, but also thank you for having me. I mean, the drone strike yesterday, I guess may have been 2 days ago when we take into consideration the time zones. It's really weird, right? Because if the Taliban, well, first of all, it's rare that the United States would conduct a drone strike in a densely populated urban area, right? That just doesn't happen. And if the Taliban were, in fact, our partners, could not have the United States just said, hey, Taliban, here is this vehicular pinata full of explosives. Can't you go and do something about it? Our friends, the Taliban, right? So that's really weird. The other thing that's really weird is the so-called ISIS KP attack that happened last week. Not a single Talib was killed, right? So there's a lot of things about this that doesn't pass the Bakwas sniff test for sure.
Yeah. But let me ask you this. So let's start with the airport attack itself, in which 170 Afghans lose their lives, 13 U.S. Marines get killed. The Americans have intel that is so specific that they're able to literally tweet about the impending attack to the day, to almost the hour, but they aren't able to stop it. They aren't able to stop it.
Even I had tweeted about it. If you go back and you look at my Twitter timeline, many of us that study Afghanistan, we knew about it, and we tweeted about it. So I really can't. I simply can't explain it. It doesn't. None of this makes sense. And when things don't make sense, you have to start asking other questions. But it's not as if the Americans haven't worked with the Taliban in the past. There was this really important story that came out. I think it was in the spring of 2020. It was at the time when President Trump was promising that he was just going to hammer the Taliban because the Taliban weren't honoring their promises in Doha, as if they ever did. But at the same time, we were providing drone support to the Taliban, who were then fighting ISIS. We weren't coordinating with the Taliban, what we were doing is that we were picking up their radio chatter. I mean, they were just on, handheld walkie-talkies. And so picking up where they were and what operations they would be conducting, we had drones in the sky to support Taliban fighters. But the other thing that I understand why analysts believe it to be true, but those of us like Praveen Swami and people who've been working in the region don't buy it. If you look at all the Western analysts, especially those who are like 25, they are adamant that the Taliban and ISIS KP are sworn enemies. And I think this analysis is born out of their knowledge, such as it is, of ISIS, where al-Baghdadi declared all other caliphates to be, unlawful. But ISIS KP isn't really that, right? It's a lot of them are reflagged Talibs. A lot of them are sectarian murderers from Pakistan, from Lashkar-e-Jhangvi and SSP. They're actually Deobandi. They have much more in common with the Taliban than not. And so the people I talk to on the ground, and Afghans have been saying this for a very long time, is that the ISI has been really busy trying to rein in ISIS KP. And it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because it's classic ISI MO, which is you've got two murderous hyenas. How do you make sure that they don't begin operating off of your leash? Well, every once in a while, you'll turn one murderous hyena on the other, right?
So hang on. So
Yeah.
both basically for you, the Taliban and the ISIS K or the ISIS KP are on a leash controlled by the same entity.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's a long leash, but yeah, the ISIs, and that's why I call it ISI KP. So I think a lot of the Western analysts are kind of leaping into this conflict space, kind of opportunistically. They're doing their best. They think that what they know about ISIS, based upon its presence in Syria and Iraq, has explanatory power. And I don't think that's true.
Yeah. So let's try and unpack the intent in a completely commonsensical way. It seems to me that what the Kabul attack and the fear of another one is doing is for the Taliban to say to the Americans and to the rest of the world, hello world, you need us to fight this evil entity called the ISIS KP. And suddenly we, the Talibs, are the good guys. And that seems to be the intent. It's so obvious.
I mean, I certainly agree with you, but then you and I are grown-ups. Sorry. Yeah, I am really tired of like the 20-somethings and their hot takes. I'm like, just sit down, grown-ups are talking. But
only
yeah,
you can get away with saying that.
You get away with saying it too. That's why I like you. But you're right. And this doesn't make any sense at all, right? If the Taliban have all of these effective checkpoints all over town, right, to intimidate Afghans from getting to the airport, surely they can detect an entire vehicle festooned with explosives, right? It just doesn't, when things don't make common sense, you have to start asking other questions about why this is going on. And that's certainly where I am. The Taliban benefit from this. So I just don't buy it. I really don't. But I think if we were to just roll all of this up, right, at a higher level, I mean, this is sort of what we're talking about are like the placement of deck chairs on the Titanic, after it hit the iceberg. And we just have to raise other questions about the Biden administration. I think everything that he's done is impeachable. And as you know, I was an incredibly vocal critic of President Trump because virtually everything he did was impeachable. Well, this is impeachable too. And
tell our audience why. Tell our audience why. Because Biden keeps defending himself by saying there's great support for the withdrawal of American troops. He keeps shifting the goalpost to the actual fact of the withdrawal and not how he's done it. You've got to worry when Trump's statement makes more sense than Biden, which is that you take out the civilians first and then the military. You've got to really worry when Trump makes more sense.
No, I agree with you. I mean, now let's be really clear. Biden did not support a counterinsurgency presence. I mean, when he was the vice president, he was really clear. He didn't like having a counterinsurgency presence. What he always wanted was counterterrorism plus. So for those of us who kind of watched the early days of the administration, we kind of saw this coming, right? I think the most important indicator of what was going to happen was that he had kept Zalmay Khalilzad, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I had expected he would, because there was nothing in the campaign that made me believe that there was any light between the positions of President Trump, who, of course, made this disastrous deal, and who is sort of swan screw you to Biden, withdrew a large number of troops, which really would bind his hand. But there was no indication that Biden wanted to do anything differently. I think that's really important. And it was Khalilzad, right, who and God bless Lisa Curtis, who was on the Trump NSC. You know, she was
Yeah,
just constantly fighting the good fight. And she's also, I'm very glad to say that she's one of my dearest friends and battle buddies in this. You know,
yeah,
what the hell are you men doing?
yeah,
Because it really is just a bunch of men screwing up a country, right? And let's just also call it what it is. It's a bunch of men. They have been consistently wrong for 20 years, and the
yeah,
media continue to go back to them and ask them for their opinion. I'm also sick and tired of the lack of accountability of these talking heads who've never been right and yet are continued um, to be invited to be parts of policy discussions and so forth. But Zalmay Khalilzad was single-handedly the most responsible for normalizing the Taliban. He's the one that brought them to Doha, you know, this dog and pony show in nice hotels, lots of time in the spotlight. I mean, he gave them a legitimacy that they truly did not deserve. And he was behind trying to force the Afghan government to accommodate the murderous Taliban just because they had Pakistan's firepower behind them.
yeah,
So anyone that wanted to change course would have immediately sacked him. But even during the interim, it was the interim, you know, prior to Biden being inaugurated, it was clear that he was keeping
yeah,
Zalilzad, as I call him. So there's nothing that Trump did that Biden is interested in reversing. And the other thing I know is that at one point in April, Biden asked his military folks how long it would take to get the US out of Afghanistan. And he looked down at his calendar or his watch or whatever, and he said, okay, that's now. We'll be out by 9/11. And he just abruptly announced, we're leaving. And, you know, in addition to, so if you knew you were going to do this, right, he should have begun processing. He needed to scale up the SIV visa process. He should have done that during the transition.
yeah,
He should have been preparing from on day one of his inauguration. These evacuations needed to proceed. But when he took out the remaining military forces that were doing the, so people don't understand why did the ANA just fold? It's a question that I find frustrating. So the ANA, I mean, you've worked in Kashmir for forever, right? So
yeah,
we don't know the exact numbers, so we're gonna eyeball it.
yeah,
So Kashmir is what, a third to a fourth of the size of Afghanistan. It has pretty good road, rail, and air connectivity, right? It's not unnavigable. Like Afghanistan is like a mountain with some stuff around it. So Afghanistan doesn't have good road, rail, nor for that matter, good air. Those places need Most places need to be negotiated through helicopters, right? We lost a lot of people in helicopter crashes. So the Indian Army, guesstimating 300,000. It's a professional army. You may quibble with what they do, how they do it, human rights, aid to civil, all that stuff. You can quibble, but they're solid soldiers. They know what they're doing. They're good soldiers. In addition to that, you've got the Central Reserve Police Forces, the Raष्ट्riya Rifles. Along the international border, you've got the BSF, right? You have a lot of competent professional people who know how to do things. So, and that's a country, that's an area like a third or fourth the size of Afghanistan. So we go to Afghanistan, 300,000 A&A in paper. It's not 300,000. There are a lot of ghost soldiers. The U.S. knew about ghost soldiers. We basically let those commanders take that money, kind of as a bribe. The Americans never dealt with innumeracy and illiteracy. We just kept building workarounds, right? It's something that you don't have to worry about illiteracy in your Indian officer corps. You got to deal with that in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And we insisted upon putting them on American weapons, which are great if you know how to use them and maintain them. If you don't, they're just an expensive paperweight. So this really hindered our ability, that and the corruption, which we, of course, also fostered, to make a competent A&A. But, they at any given time only had about 100,000, right? So just put that in comparison to what the Indians have in Kashmir.
Yeah.
And then you factor in the difficult logistics. But the most deadly part of this is that they don't have close air support. There is no indigenous close air support. So when the Americans took away close air support, they have no indigenous casualty evacuation. And the Americans were basically maintaining all of the equipment. So when he pulls that out in April and May, what's he leaving the Afghans to fight with?
Yeah. So
Right.
here's my question. I agree completely with your assessment, but I think we want to turn our attention to what happens now. And you have to question who's briefing the White House, who's briefing the State Department. And for our audience, before you respond, I know you know this clip, when the US officials stand up and say that the Taliban and the Haqqani network are separate entities, you've got to really wonder whether even basic sort of intel briefings are going right. So let's just listen to what the spokesperson had to say when he argued that these are two separate groups.
My second question has to do with security around the airport. Yesterday, General McKenzie said that the Defense Department is sharing versions of information with the Taliban, and there's some coordination on security. Does that coordination extend to members of the Haqqani network who are also providing security?
No, it does not. The Taliban and the Haqqani network are separate entities. Yes.
Okay. Kabul is effectively controlled right now, Kabul security, by everybody I've spoken to, by the Haqqani network. The Haqqani network is effectively controlled by Pakistan. Sirajuddin Haqqani is a key person in the Taliban superstructure. How does the US State Department spokey not know this?
So, I mean, they're making a living complicating nuance and making nuance seem more significant than it is. Technically, they are a separate organization. They have their own chain of command. They have somewhat different political positions. So he's not lying. He's just not telling the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's exploiting the fact that that person is not going to be able to, because I'm sure the person asking the question doesn't know a lot about either organizational structure, and that there's not going to be a competent pushback.
Yeah. So what happens now? The Americans, do you think, first of all, the 31st August deadline holds good? Or do you think the Americans are going to be forced to extend it? Two, when all the Americans are out, if they are, or all the people, including assets that the Americans need to pull out, are taken out, does America change its attitude to the Taliban and, more importantly, to Pakistan? Or does it carry on just the same?
All right. So I actually have zero indications that things are going to change. I mean, that this date's going to change. I mean, I was working pretty hard on some exfiltrations, which is why we had such problems last week. And we were all very cognizant that right now it's the golden window of chaos because the Americans are still there. And after the golden window of chaos passes, then the Taliban's tyranny is going to consolidate. And, they have all of the biometrics of NDS, of government officials. That they basically have everything that they need to conduct a systematic bloodbath. And so I have had zero indications that deadline is changing. I would be incredibly surprised if it did. But I will say there's just a lot of disinformation coming out of the Biden campaign, things that are really, they rise to the level of Trumpian disinformation. So
What's the most absurd thing you've heard the Biden administration say?
that this is a successful evacuation. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty absurd. I mean, they're focusing on the technicalities of it, right? There's been the number of sorties coming in and out of Afghanistan is really high. These are large aircraft. They're C-17s. There's a single, I mean, I'm sure you've flown into Kabul. It's a very
Yeah.
urban airport, right? It's actually not an easy airport to land in because of the mountains. It's like Kabul's like it's like a bowl. And so landing is, it's always perilous landing. And so the ops tempo of these sorties is impressive, but what's not stated is that many of these sorties are leaving empty. And the planes have to leave empty because there's an incoming aircraft, and you can't just have these C-17s lounging around that small airport on that airfield. So there's the disinformation about the ANA not fighting. The Afghans have to fight for their own country and then of course at the end of this, which I just find astonishing, and again, when Lindsey Graham is out here saying ridiculous things, he always says ridiculous things, but I don't see the president pushing back. He has not once criticized Pakistan, not once. And I've seen a circus of people, thanking Pakistan for its efforts in casualty evacuations. So going to your question about what's next, here is my deepest and darkest fear. Does any of us believe that that drone flew out of the Emirates yesterday? I don't.
Yeah.
I certainly don't believe that that drone flew out of the Emirates. Here's my fear. The United States knows, because it's been lying to us all along, the Taliban are going to keep Afghanistan free from terrorists. They are themselves terrorists. It's kind of funny. So they know that they have an intelligence problem, right? Drones only work. I mean, so people focus upon the drones as if they're magical. Drones are just a conveyance upon which you stick a bomb and you deliver the ordnance. What makes the drones effective is that we have on the ground intelligence, right? So that when we have visual information from surveillance drone footage, we know how to interpret that, right? We know that the signature strikes that were based fully upon the signatures of the targets without having an intelligence package were disastrous. They tended to kill repeatedly people who were not the targets. So for these things to be effective, you have to have intelligence-led packages that tell us who these people are, what they're doing, and what their intent is. That requires on-the-ground assets. All right, so
Basically, you're saying the drones flew out of Pakistan.
Saying that because I don't know, but I don't find it credible that they flew out of UAE, right? Did they fly over Iranian airspace? Did they fly over the sea and then over Pakistani airspace? I mean, there's just, again, these are just common sense questions, right? I look at a map and I'm like, smells like bakwas to me. So there has to be another answer. But I really fear that what the Pakistanis are already doing, thanks to the famed USIP quisling, Moeed Yusuf, he's already saying that if you don't recognize the Taliban, if you don't make Pakistan your partner, 9/11 is going to happen again. He said, mark my words.
And then later he said, I think this is the Christina Lamb interview, and then he said, I've been mischaracterized and so on.
Actually, so I'm working on a blog post right now where I'm translating what he says in Urdu, because he's even more heinous in Urdu than he is in English. Like, he says ridiculous things like, in Pakistan, there's so much freedom. You can criticize the army here, but if you criticize the U.S. Army in America, you will be disappeared. He says these ridiculous things. So anyway, I fear that we are going to be handing, in effect, the Afghan policy over to the Pakistanis officially, which we did anyways with this policy, right? It was a de facto victory for the Pakistanis. But since we don't have an embassy in Afghanistan, we will be more dependent upon Pakistan.
So why? So why?
It,
Okay, hang on.
yeah,
Earlier, the United States used to argue that NATO troops needed to pass through Pakistan, the transit routes, the supply
yeah.
chain. You needed Pakistan for that. Now there are no American troops. So why is America's Afghan policy falling back on Pakistan all over again?
Listen, I mean, obviously, I think it's just a circus of absurdity. But since they don't have an embassy and we don't have terribly awesome relations with Tajikistan and Uzbekistan because of the very significant role that the Russians are playing in the Taliban regime to ice us out of Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And obviously, we have really foobarred our relations with Iran because of the Israel lobby here in the United States. You go back to the map. It's really outrageous. This should be a time when we no longer have troops in Afghanistan, where we recognize the problem set is Pakistan, and stop pretending that somehow they're the fire brigade when in fact they are the arsonist. But I go back to what I've been saying now for, I don't know, the better part of this war, is that, if you're not willing to sanction Pakistan for being the single most significant source of insecurity in this region, after you found Osama bin Laden a mile away, a lovely stroll from Kakul, the Pakistan Military Academy, also in Abbottabad, as the mainstream media tends to slaughter the name. When are you going to sanction Pakistan? So
Yeah.
I'm, being a cynic has generally, I have generally not been incorrect about our relationship with Pakistan, and I really do fear that the United States is going to be persuaded that Pakistan is the answer without ever rephrasing the question.
Yeah, I tend to share your assessment. I have a last question for you. How do you explain to the American people whom Biden will keep calculating broadly support, pulling out the troops? How do you convince the Americans and the rest of the Western world that what happens in Afghanistan does not stay in Afghanistan, and what happens from Pakistan does not stay in Afghanistan, or even just in India either?
So this is like the absurdity of it, right? Most Americans didn't know that we had a couple of thousand troops providing close air support. Most Americans have really moved on to other things like attacking Dr. Fauci and waging a war on masks and putting everything in their arms to cure coronavirus, except the vaccine to prevent it, right? So Americans are kind of like goldfish in a bowl. Forget a lot of stuff. If it weren't for this endless parade of things that were begun under the Trump administration with the Doha process, this endless circus of Taliban being pictured on the various newscasts, I don't think most Americans would have known, and they wouldn't have cared. I mean, look how long we've been in South Korea. Look how long we've been in Japan. Look how long we've been in Europe. Look how long we've been in Saudi Barbaria. Right? Technically, we've moved to Doha, right? So we weren't taking casualties. We were enabling the Taliban. We were enabling the ANA to continue fighting the Taliban. And now you could then ask the question, isn't that posture just mowing the grass? Well, yeah, but that's always what it's going to be when it comes to counterterrorism. You are always mowing the grass.
Yeah.
And I think that it was sustainable. It was affordable. It gave us enough firepower to keep our embassy there. It enabled us to do precision strikes with drones on Taliban packages. It was sustainable. And I think that's the biggest lie that's
Do you
been
find
told.
do you find any merit in the argument that there isn't one Taliban, there are many Talibans? Two, that a Taliban in government is different from a Taliban in Quetta. And finally, I saw on your Twitter timeline you weren't convinced about the number of weapons that have fallen into the hands of the Taliban, and I do want to ask you about that. So you had the Times sort of talking about this sort of massive weaponry that the Americans appear to have left behind. You're not convinced of that.
Oh,
But
no, I didn't say that. I simply retweeted someone's dubiety because I thought it was an interesting point. I have no opinion on that tweet that I had
okay.
retweeted.
Okay. But on the larger question of there not being a single Taliban, there being different Talibans, there being, a Taliban that may be willing or ready to flex its muscle vis-a-vis Pakistan because now it doesn't need Pakistan anymore. Do you find any merit in this argument that's being propagated?
I mean, not really, right? It's an argument of convenience, right? People want us to believe that those flashy, savvy Taliban in Doha are like the new face of the Taliban. But even look at how those so-called new Taliban interacted with women.
Yeah,
And women,
and,
right?
and even with men, that clip of them standing with guns behind a television presenter, I mean, that kind of says everything, right?
Right. And if the Taliban were anything but the pieces of crap that they were before, they would not have done this, right? They would not have been rounding up girls 10 and younger and forcing them off into marriage, right? They would not have done the things that they have already done. So this, and in fact, I am so tired of hearing it. I can't. If anyone asks, when a journalist asks me, how will Taliban 2.0 govern? And I said, how Taliban 1.0 governed? By terrifying hearts and minds and by having a lot of support from China and from Pakistan. And now they have support from Russia. So the Taliban do not need, they might want it. It's like a cherry on their rancid sundae, but they don't need international support. They don't need international recognition. People forget that the Chinese and the Taliban had very good relations prior to 9/11. The Chinese simply want the Taliban to not support anyone that's going to cause any problems in China. And in exchange for that, they will pay handsomely. And the stakes have changed, right? Because now China is the single largest investor in Afghanistan. So for those investments to pay off literally, the Taliban need, is that the Serena?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Familiar, right? Familiar
Yeah.
images. Familiar images.
So it reminds me when I see these goons sitting in a hotel, like they're anything but monsters. It reminds me, I was a student in Peshawar in 1995. I mean, I was in Lahore, but I would go to Peshawar because I was doing research on the Sikh community that was in Peshawar. And so as a student, I didn't have any money, right? You just, you eat at the dhabas or whatever. But Saturday was I would save all my money and I would splurge because the Pearl Continental had alleged filter coffee. And the Taliban would always be there, and they would be at the buffet, and they wouldn't even have plates. They would just like foist their disgusting paws into the food trays. And I remember so vividly they had this sign, which they also had, by the way, at the Intercon in Srinagar. This very nicely written sign: kindly deposit your firearms with the concierge.
Yeah, and the thing is, you spent a lifetime studying these guys, right? They are now being whitewashed.
This is the gray hair. This is the gray hairs from it.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying they're being mainstream, they're being legitimized. Is there anything the world can still do if China is willing to bankroll them, Pakistan's willing to sort of, provide them everything else? What can anybody do?
So first of all, the United Nations, that mudulus of morons and cowards, what are they going to do? Like, what have they done, right? I mean, look how difficult it was just to get Jamaat al-Dawa designated, right? So,
but that's because China kept blocking it, right?
Exactly. So now we have a Chinese and a Russian veto. Right. So I think it's going to be really difficult. But I think all of us that have, like you, myself, that have been I mean, I've spent my entire adult life, literally since like the early 90s, studying this region. And I don't, moonlight on Morocco or Malaysia. I just stay right here and just watch the bullshit fly. And there's going to be another tragic event. And it may not happen on the specific date of 9/11. It could happen on May 3rd. But this region, I mean, has a way of bringing us back in very predictably. And it's not because of some inherent unmanageability of Afghanistan. It is because of the perduring desire of the Pakistanis to colonize Afghanistan for its purposes of strategic depth, which it inherited from the British. I'm also tired of people saying, well, this is a concept from the Cold War. No, it's not. They inherited it from the British, as did India, by the way. But Nehru wasn't having it, right? Rather than keeping NIFA in the position of the Northwest Frontier Province, as Pakistan did, although they did change the name eventually about a decade ago. And Nehru was like, no, we're not having any of this frontier crap. And he moved very quickly to begin Indianizing those areas. Pakistan kept that security architecture. So it's literally in their DNA. And the Afghans loathe the Pakistanis. They're not going to be a vassal state of the Pakistanis. And so it's not that Afghanistan has been the victim of imperial wars. That's an easy thing to say, but long before the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, the Pakistanis were waging jihad in Afghanistan under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in 1973. So it's become really lazy to say, oh, this is because of great powers interfering in Afghanistan. No, it's really Pakistan cannot tolerate having an Afghanistan on its border that is not a vassal.
Okay, I have to close, but I have to ask you, does the Biden administration not get Pakistan? Or, is this incompetence or is it ignorance?
Well, it can't be ignorance because he was the vice president for 8 years. And you'll recall Bruce Riedel, he's a very vocal critic of Pakistan. He holds no punches. He's not always accurate, but he's not. A lot of things he says are just factually dubious, like his fascination with Benazir Bhutto and whatever. But by the time he was selected, right, to lead the study of the studies, he had already written a book that was pretty condemning of Pakistan. And so the Obama administration hired Bruce Riedel to be the person who would be the analyst of the analyses. And he was in charge of putting together this white paper. And Biden was very much involved in that. I met him once. A handful of us had dinner at his house when he was the vice president. He was pretty clear-eyed about what Pakistan was. But I think to our, me and you and basically anyone who's clueful about Pakistan's continuing frustration, Americans just have this idea that Pakistan is just too hard, right? And this is the result of nuclear coercion. Even Lindsey Graham in his obnoxious tweets the other day, it was prefaced with Pakistan's a nuclear power, right? But the thing that I find fascinating is that, we never tried to stop Pakistan from being this nuclear power. We've never even once considered treating Pakistan like the enemy that it is and attempted to shape its behavior through sanctions like we have with Iran. Americans have almost fetishized this Iranian danger while completely failing to realize that Pakistan is far more dangerous than Iran. And we continue to treat it like a friend that ghosts us as opposed to an enemy that takes our money, kills our troops, and undermines all of our major security interests in the region. But you be you, America, you be you.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. And I think here's the sad part of everything you've said. We're in for some terrible times in this region. And if the Americans think it's only going to be about this region, well, I don't want to say, but you've said it, there is going to be another dire, terrible incident, and it's probably going to bring the Americans right back where they started, and it is back to the future in so many ways. Christine Fair, thank you for this very, very blunt conversation. It's always a pleasure having you, and we'll have you back soon.
Thank you so much. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, Christine. See you soon.
Anandvich Rahoji.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.